Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. So as you already know, the PS5 and Xbox Series X specs have been officially revealed. And that made a lot of different reactions from the community and also from gaming journalists. And of course, there is this sort of fanboyism in there and sort of bias as well, because we are all human. However, I want to try to look at these in the best way I can describe them objectively. Now, from the specs, you cannot really tell the real world experience like 100%, but you can tell where things are going and which console is going to be more powerful. Spoiler alert, it's the Series X. Now, why is the Series X objectively more powerful? In some departments, but also not as powerful as the PS5 in other departments. Now, when we heard about the specs of the Series X, people at Microsoft told the journalists that the clock speed of the CPU is fixed, as well as the GPU, which means that you have something clear to work with. Now, there is of course SMT enabled if developers want to do it, to have an extra 200 MHz from 3.6 GHz to 3.8. But it's clear that the 3.6 GHz is a clock speed that's going to work all of the time. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because it seems like as if people in Microsoft knew what would Sony be doing, and that's why they stressed that the 3.6 GHz speed is there all the time, because as you know, Sony and the PS5 has this 3.5 peak or maximum speed, and this raises of course a lot of questions to what is the maximum speed and how long is it going to be sustained. Same goes for the GPU. Of course, the Series X has more compute units, but the PS5 has more bandwidth. It also states in the PS5 that it is variable. Now, why is this very important? Because what I remember from this variable thing and up to or maximum is what happened with Google Stadia. They said that they have this teraflop thing and so on and so forth, but some games didn't take advantage of it. Especially I remember the case of Destiny 2, which ran at 1080p, but the specs of the Stadia servers were much more powerful. And then Google Stadia developers and people behind it said that yeah, it's up to the developers to do what they think is the best performance. And this raises, an alert for me, because Sony on the one hand saying, yeah, this is what we have and this is the peak performance of the CPU and the GPU, but the developer may or may not take advantage of it. There is another thing, which is the SSD. Of course, the SSD on the PS5 is way ahead and much better than the one that is in the Xbox Series X. So Sony has always been saying the SSD is the main component in the PS5. And then in the presentation, it shows how the SSD is going to be taken advantage of to have more room for developers to work with it. And then, of course, they focus on this instantaneous play without loading times, etc., etc. Now, whether this is going to be possible or not, it's another question. Of course, it's going to load much faster than the Xbox Series X, but that's it. We don't know how developers are going to take advantage of this and whether they can work with the SSD and make it, push itself to the limits. Now, talking about the SSD again, there is this proprietary solution from Microsoft, which is clear and transparent. They showed you that kind of USB-like cute thing, SSD, and they said that it's going to be linked directly to the console, which means that the performance that you get from the internal SSD on the S Series X is the same performance that you will get from that proprietary solution they suggest. On the other hand, Sony says that you can use an NVMe to expand your storage. However, this is where things are not clear, because the NVMe that is going to be used is much different than the ones in the market. So even if we suppose that companies make SSDs like that one and it will be validated and will work on the PS5, it's not going to be guaranteed to work in PC, which will make it more of a proprietary solution, which means that PCs right now cannot take advantage of the way SSDs are going to work in the PS5. Now, all of this does not mean that the PS5 is going to be much weaker than the Xbox Series X. Of course not. It's going to be a powerful machine, probably not as powerful as the Series X, but how that is going to translate into the real world, which means games and gaming performance, is another question. Now, I want just to stress that at least Microsoft at this point is more transparent than Sony in terms of the specs, so there is no variable bullshit there. We know what's in there, we know how it's going to perform, we know the raw performance, so we know what to expect. With the variable thing that Sony is proposing, it could be a beast of a machine, but it could also be a disappointment in some games. Of course, not in all games, because developers are not the same. They don't have the same skills. Some are more skillful and obviously will have more tools to work with and will yield more satisfying gameplay experiences. There is also the demo that Digital Foundry has talked about that concerns Gears 5, and it is just a work of 2 weeks just to make it compatible with the Series X, and the results are very promising. Now, bear in mind that the work of 2 weeks is not like the work of months or years, which means that even with 2 weeks we got very promising results from the Series X and from Gears 5. Does this mean that the war is over and that everything has been decided? Obviously not, because there are two very important factors to take into consideration, and we're talking here about the games, the first party games that are going to be in each console, and the pricing of the consoles themselves. Now, the pricing plays a huge part, and it seems like neither company is willing to tell us the pricing of their consoles. Heck, even the PS5 console, we don't know how it looks like at this point. But if Microsoft can propose a very reasonable price and shows us some good work with the games, the first party games that they have, it's going to be much more easier for them to convince gamers to buy their consoles. Of course, Microsoft has been buying a lot of game studios. As of now, they have 14 new game studios, and that goes without saying that Sony has a lot of good games, a lot of first party games and exclusives. Sony is superior in this department, and that fact alone makes a lot of people decide to buy a Sony console, understandably so, because there are so many good games that you cannot play elsewhere. Anyway, that's it for me for now. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and I will talk to you again soon. Have a good one.